Hiya, Wanju. Good morning, welcome. My name is Shamit Sagar. I'm really pleased to be here. If you don't know me, can't really recognize the faces out there with the lights on us. I'm the director of the University of Western Australia's Public Policy Institute. To give us a little shout out for a moment, we're established in 2018-2019 for the express purpose to make sure that our research is used by real people, real institutions to improve real lives. I could go on all day, but I think you probably get the gist of what it is there. Universities have got to spend a lot of time and a lot of attention making sure the research has a public benefit. In 1913, UWA was established, and it says in the statute in WA, in order to improve the welfare of the people of the state. And I like to think that the work we're doing in our institute, alongside our professors, alongside practitioners in different parts of industry, is part and parcel of UWA having that community-oriented mission. So I'm very glad to be here this morning. Can I also, just before we get stuck into gender equity and what still needs to be done, say a little bit about what I think would be the scene setting for this. You haven't really come here to hear from me. We've got a distinguished panel who will be getting stuck into this. But it's probably worthwhile, just if you're not familiar, thinking about the fact that as recently as 2006, the World Economic Forum, in its gender gap report, reported that Australia was 15th in a league table for gender equity. This basket of different indicators try to measure whether or not life in the societies of all these different countries is fair for women, gender equity, in fact, gender parity. The bad news is in 2006 we were 15th. The even worse news is as recently as 2021, Australia had gone down that league table to be 50th. That doesn't happen by accident. It suggests that a generation has passed in which gender equity, gender fairness hasn't been at the front of our minds, never mind what it is that governments, businesses and others have been doing. Fun fact, so to speak, there are about 20% of CEOs and company chairs in the Australian 200 stock exchange, and 20% of them are women, the chairs and CEOs. You can think that's a high number or low number, depends on where it was in the past. The trouble is, if you compare that with the number of individuals who are CEOs or company chairs by the name of Andrew, you'll discover that you're 27 times more likely to be in that occupation, in that role, than if you're a woman. Surprising. And for women in the labour market up and down Australia who are actually working, it looks like your annual pay gap, the disparity, continues to be something like $25,000 per year less than your male counterparts. It's a lot of money. It's also worth remembering that although that's a headline number, what researchers and others do is they try to peel away from that and they have a little look at, is that down to men and women in the same job, or is it down to other factors? So what we do is we control for that. We adjust for the fact that men and women often aren't in the same jobs. Caring industries and so on are very, very heavily skewed towards women, other industries towards men. It also takes account of the fact that a fair number of women spend time out of the labour market, raising kids and so on and so forth. So when you adjust for that, the bad news is, the good news is that $25,000 per year goes down. The bad news is it only goes down to about half of that. It should go down to zero if we take into account of all of those things. So there's plenty of work to get stuck into. These are just sort of headlines to get us in the frame thinking about gender equity if you need that. I'm delighted to be able to chair a panel this morning and share the insights and expertise of 4 very remarkable women who either work with or know the institute that I lead. And they are, and we'll introduce them a bit more in detail, Professor Romola Bucks, who is sat right behind me here, so I'm probably slightly in your way. Romola is a Pro-Vice-Chancellor for Health and Medical Research at the university, and she has a distinguished career in neuroscience, including, most recently, heading up the School of Psychological Science. So she'll talk a little bit about that, and perhaps the HE and the knowledge sector. We've also got Sukhjit Kaur Khalsa, who is there, middle of the panel there. You'll know her from many things that have appeared in sort of mainstream media, including the Fully Seek production. She's a performer and filmmaker, and she's got some very unique stories to tell about the creative industries, not just based upon specifically what she's done. Moving along, we've got Linda Savage, who is sat here. Linda is a former member of Parliament. She's been dealing with issues of gender equity in the state for some time, and we'll come back to that in a second. And I'm very pleased that she's also a member of the advisory board of the Public Policy Institute. And last but not least, we have Jess over there, Jessica Smith in the yellow. Jess is a co-founder of something called, an organisation called She Runs. She Runs, two separate words. You may not have heard of it, you may have. If you haven't, take time to look at what they do. They translate the political aspirations of young women who want to go into politics into practical action. A formal training program, amongst other things, is the things that they deliver, and they have a huge impact upon ensuring that women have the skills to at least match and therefore exceed the outcomes of their male counterparts. So with that all in mind, I'm going to take my seat over here and we're going to sort of move into this discussion. Let me begin. I'm going to turn to Linda, sat right to my right here. Linda, you were involved in a 1994 report that was established here in WA dealing with gender equity. I wonder if you could just share with the panel some of the sort of headlines about what that was about, what you got into, and what the lessons have been a generation down the line.
Well, thank you, Shamit. Yes, I was a member of the task force, and this is the report that we produced in 1994, examining gender bias in the law and in the administration of justice. At the time, I remember people said that the task force was not necessary, that women now in 1994 could do whatever they wanted. Some people were openly dismissive, and there are plenty of women who did not want to be associated with us. Some argued that change was underway. We just need to be patient. Yet still, we're talking about many of the same issues and looking for solutions. I think Grace Tame and Brittany Higgins have really focused us on the need to question why, despite aspirational statements, reports like this over 30 years ago, recommendations, legislative reform and activism, we still have not brought about the change that we need to, and why another generation of those women are left to do so much of the heavy lifting. So I would suggest that there's three overarching reasons why we haven't seen the progress in some areas that we had hoped for. The first is that I think that still there's many people who don't understand or accept gender bias. And what I mean by that is the shorthand that we use to describe a world that favours men and is seen through their eyes and which is baked into attitudes, policies and institutions. And there are still plenty of people, I think, who don't really accept it. And I include amongst that high-profile women, some of whom only discover it when their own careers are at risk. The second reason I would say is that women, as we were told in 1994 and today still, are told that they need to be patient, and they accept that. So I'm going to tell you a little story about patience. When I was 22, my first proper job was as a researcher and speechwriter for Senator Ruth Coleman. She was only the 8th woman in the Senate. So this was in the 1980s, and so I saw firsthand how the federal parliament operated, where women fitted in, how they were on the edges and had little or no influence and were like outsiders. A decade ago, as Shamit mentioned, I was a member of the State Parliament in Western Australia. Now, obviously, there were far more women and there had been a lot of change, but it was still a real shock for me, coming from the legal sector, to see how out of step the Parliament and political parties were with gender bias and sexism and the acceptance that these were issues that we still need to actively deal with. At the time I raised it with people and I tried to get a cross-political parties group of women meeting regularly, but there was very little interest in that. And of course, as you know, last year Kate Jenkins handed down her report following the Brittany Higgins revelations, calling for fundamental change in the Parliament and its culture. So women had been patient, but I understand now why women are not patient. And the third reason is what I would call an over-reliance on trickle-down feminism. Many women once believed, I was one of them, that the more women that were appointed to positions of power and influence, the more quickly we would bring about change. Now, that's happened to an extent, and I certainly think women should be able to hold and aspire to all the most senior positions and positions they were excluded from. But it has not brought about the pace of change that we hoped for. And so I think now is the time to refocus from the bottom up. And what I mean by that is to push change at at a greater level by raising up those women who are on low incomes, the women mainly who are caring for children who are receiving social security payments, an area of law I'm very familiar with, and who have the responsibility for caring for children. Because once we raise them up with financial security and opportunity, they will themselves be able to leave situations of domestic violence and take up educational opportunities and be part of a real wave of change.
Thank you, Linda. We're going to come back to that in a short while. I want to switch now to my colleague, Sukhjit. Sukhjit, you've had quite a lot of exposure and a lot of success in the creative industry of late, become a bit of a household name in Australia, which is great. I wonder if you could do two things for us. One is tell a little bit about your story, your experiences when you've gone through that, what that was telling you about gender equity for yourself and other people like you. And at the same time, talk a little bit about whether or not, on the one hand, there have been sort of progress with gender equity for women as a whole, but for subgroups not necessarily to the same extent.
Absolutely. I think that until we as women, as trans people, women with disabilities from least privileged classes, from different racial backgrounds, different religious backgrounds, different minority groups all around Australia, all around the world, until we all feel equal and we've got gender equity within that, I don't think there's anything to celebrate about. I think that it's really common, and I grew up in Perth, went to UWA, did a political science degree, wanted to become a politician. I too myself have been internalized a lot of whiteness around me, and I used to believe those things too. I used to think white feminism was for me. I used to see myself as someone who was included into that. It was only until I started, reflecting back now and realizing there were lots of moments that I wasn't included in that conversation. I work in the arts, so, films and theatre shows and visual arts, whatever art form that is that you're into. When you look out into the stories that are being told in Australia, and you don't see yourself in them in terms of representation, but if you do see yourself, as an Indian woman or a South Asian woman or a woman of colour, it's still a stereotype, which I feel is quite victimising, and it's not empowering. So either there's stories of South Asia that there's a white saviour complex that comes into play, or there's, we hear a lot about domestic violence and sexual violence and gang rapes in India, and we see, a lot of horrible practices in Australia as well. And I think that I get really defensive about that stuff because I think it's a human issue, and sometimes you can be typecasted into being a stereotype. And in my career, for example, my partner's here today, and just to break it down for you, when I go for a meeting, or if I have something that is confronting to discuss in my world, in whatever I do, I sometimes have to take my male partner, and they end up looking at him the whole time but speaking to me, because I feel like there's still within a very inclusive and awesome industry, there's a lot of issues going on. And I feel like lately, we were speaking earlier, you were saying, someone asked you something about International Women's Day, and you were like, nah, I'm frustrated, and I'm not feeling patient, and I'm feeling pretty shitty about life, and that's where I'm at. I think that's where I'm at right now, because, how is that empowering? And I think, when we hear of Grace Tame and Brittany Higgins, of course I'm going to support that. Of course I'm going to be like, yes. But at the same time, there's a thought at the back of my mind that wonders if they were from a different race, if they were from a different culture, if they're from a different class, even the Me Too movement we were speaking about earlier, would we take them as seriously as we do with white women? And also straight white women and straight white women from privileged backgrounds. Like, I think that's something that we shouldn't be afraid to confront. It's not a bad thing. It's not about, you know, people freak out and they're like, oh my God, if we talk about this, that means I'm a bad person. No, no one wants to be a bad person. That's not what we're trying to do. It's more just about how can we get the sisterhood involved. And actually, I feel like true equality, like when I feel good in a team is when we're all feeling included. And when people call me out on stuff and they're like, that wasn't cool, you used a word that wasn't cool, or, you know, you did this and it didn't make me feel included. I don't want to go, oh, you know, fuck you. I want to go, no, I'm going to reflect on that. And I'm actually going to like think about how I can be a better person. So that's where I'm at right now in terms of both those questions. And progress, of course progress is being made, you know. We can look at things, I'm quite pessimistic right now and cynical, but I do also see beautiful, amazing things, you know, on my news feed that get me excited, that get me inspired again and make me realise that things are getting better. You know, the generation, I'm a millennial, so the generation under me, I've been working with some people in some film projects, and it's really beautiful to, some of the questions I'll ask older women, some of the questions I'll ask people my own age, and some questions I'll ask younger women, and it does feel like it's heading towards a more progressive and a more, you know, no shit attitude. Like, I think, and we shouldn't be afraid of that beautiful sentiment that's around right now, which is calling out things, which is being intolerant, being angry. It's okay to be angry, and, you know, stop being afraid of it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
So Jess, on politics, I mean, you founded She Runs. I think the audience would like to know why, what's that all about? A little bit around the perspectives of women who go through that program. But actually, I think more than anything else is that through that pipeline, you're looking certainly at federal politics, which for the last recent past has not been an attractive place for women to make their mark. Do you want to just comment a little bit about all those things?
Yeah, so my friend Martina and I founded She Runs at the end of 2019, and Martina has a background in campaigning, anti-tobacco campaigning and anti-slavery campaigning, myself in the trade union movement for the past decade. And something happened where we'd been talking about it for 10 years really, starting an organisation but didn't because we thought that we lacked the skill. And I'm like, hello now. And then what we see in our own program, and why we started that is because we saw so many women wanting to take that step into politics, but there was such a gap between becoming a card-carrying member of a political party and then starting a political career, and that's why we formed She Runs. And in the process of that, we've had around 40 women graduate through the program of She Runs, or 40 participants graduate throughout that program. And the biggest thing, one of the biggest barriers for women not wanting to enter politics is because they think they don't have the skills to run. And if you just stop there and pause, a man would never say that, or someone who a man would never say that. Though what we always say is that in She Runs, we're not going to give you the skills to be a politician because we believe that you already have the skills, but what we will do is to create the network so you can get your foot in the door into politics. And that has been one of the biggest barriers, is having those networks for women to enter politics. Also as well, the lack of diversity within politics as well, especially for young women who've come through the program. And also as well, the code of conduct that we see in the political sphere at the moment. Women don't want to enter politics because they don't want to enter into that. So that fundamentally needs to change. And just, you know, touching on what some of the other panellists have said already, it's fantastic that, you know, we've got Grace Tame and Brittany Higgins making those changes. Though if those actions, if that assault, if that sexual violence did happen to women of colour, women of diverse backgrounds, women of different sexual orientations, would they have been taken seriously? And that's a big question that we need to ask ourselves as well as a society, because I actually don't think that they would, because that stuff happens every single day, and we have an opportunity to change that and make sure that that is changed for good. And one of the other barriers that women face when they do enter politics, and what stops women from entering, is also the barrage they'll face with the media as well. It's, you know, even though we do live in a modern society, I'm, you know, afraid to say that the media doesn't take women seriously like they do their male counterparts, and that's been a big barrier as well that we've come across in the program.
Okay. We're going to come back to that now. Romela, you are in the same industry as I am, universities. In your field, in psychology, there are more women at undergraduate level, young women who go in, than their male counterparts. That's actually true of a lot of other disciplines, but certainly in your field. But also you look at the workforce as well. I mean, one thing, I'm guessing with the kind of same time we went into higher education, it's become very, very feminized as an industry. It's very, very common to see now women climbing the ladder, you know, the academic ladder. And yet you see at the top, of course, and you know where I'm going to go with this, the top, it's different. It's an inverted sort of, it's a funnel. And so what are your thoughts about that? I mean, you look at leadership, not just of your university mind, but more generally, when you see that depletion of women, they're going up the ranks, all the way up to senior management and the very top.
Thank you, Sherman. So you're absolutely right that that women outnumber men. And as you said, the discipline of psychology particularly so, about 70% of women across students and academics. So 70% of women and academics are, sorry, let me start again. 70% of academic and student are women. When you get out into practicing psychology, so you're talking about clinical occupational psychologists, it's 80%. Yet, in both academic and practice settings, men dominate, particularly in senior positions. And the higher up you go, so whether you're a head of a department or a director, you're more likely to be a man. So let me give you an example of that from my own experience. In 2017, I became the first female, and in fact, currently the only female head of school, of the discipline of psychology at UWA in its 100-year history.
Really? Okay.
In a discipline that's 70% women. It's still kind of an extraordinary thing to me, and it was extraordinary because people will come up and say, it's extraordinary that, you know, we finally had a woman head of school, and I was going, don't you think it's extraordinary that you think it's extraordinary? Really? And if you look at universities as a whole, you'll see that this isn't just a problem for psychology. It's writ larger in psychology because of the numbers. Women make up nearly 58% of the university workforce, but they're predominantly in professional non-academic roles and predominantly in non-managerial professional non-academic roles. So 87% of people in universities are in professional roles, mostly women. They're also more likely to be in precarious or casual positions. Before COVID, when many, many more women who were in precarious or casual positions lost their jobs, about 59%, 3/5 of all casual employees were women. Part-time, fractional, fixed term. So we've got a big imbalance. We've got more women than men. We've got more women in casual positions. But even in the positions that are tenured, the higher up the greasy pole you go, the bluer it gets, the less pink it gets. So at the lower levels, academic levels, the lecturer levels, women outnumber men. As soon as you get to senior levels, so associate professor, I'm a professor, as I said, in fact, I'm the only one in my school. Did I say that? The only female professor in my school. 70% women. It swaps, so now you've got 90% more men than women in those senior roles. And if you go up even higher, it gets even worse. So there are 3 in 10 vice-chancellors of public universities in Australia who are women. And what's really intriguing about this, and I resonate to the comment you're making about, I'm tired, I don't want to wait, it's too slow, is that in 2020, 15 of Australia's 37 vice-chancellors changed over. What an opportunity in 2020 to increase the number of women. Do you think we did?
You went down.
Nah, we didn't. It got worse. 15! Oh my God. nearly half of them, and we couldn't manage to raise the number of women vice-chancellors of Australian universities. How can we not accept that gender bias is a real thing? How can we in 1994 think that there's no problem? And it's 2022 and we still can't fix it. So what that means is that despite the enormous privilege that people in universities have, I am white, I'm educated, I'm incredibly privileged. Despite that privilege, it's still harder for women to progress into leadership and senior positions. As I said, I'm one professor who's a woman in my school. So for me, it's been a really, I'm tired. I'm tired and I'm angry and I'm fed up. And you can probably tell I'm from the UK. And when I arrived, I wondered whether it would be different in Australia and in the UK. It is a bit different. Can I say this? It felt like I was going back in time.
You're going to anyhow, so.
When I arrived in Australia, it felt like it was a time warp. It felt like we have the same problem of the same substantive problem of it's harder to get advancement and to become a senior or a leader in the UK. But my experience is that the gender bias in Australia, and particularly in Western Australia, is so much more overt. Really much more overt. I've lost count of the number of times I was kind of told to tone myself down. My leadership style was, I was ruffling feathers. God, I love ruffling feathers. I've been asked to be on a committee because, and I quote, we need a woman. Is this what makes me eligible for that committee? I don't know. When I became head of school, some really well-meaning people said, you know, it's about time we need a woman. And I said, would any woman do? Or a particular woman? And it's still the case in academia, in what you think would be a more enlightened setting, that women are talked over constantly in meetings. In fact, even when I've been chairing the meeting, I get talked over. I'm not quiet. How is it possible that their ideas are not heard until they're repeated by a man? We're still doing this. And last month, I attended a conference with they were both all male panels and panels with 1 woman and 6 men, 2022. So I actually feel that Australian university culture and practice privileges men's careers still and holds back women's advancement, I'm sorry to say. And if I can come back to my experience as being head of school, when I took on the role, I thought to myself, look, here's my chance, right? I've been chafing against this. I'm now in a position to do something about this, to change things, maybe to give opportunities to immensely capable women who've been passed over historically. So I took some of the more demanding service roles off them because women get a lot of service, admin, pastoral care, which weighs them down. I passed them on to men who didn't like me for it. And then I appointed those women to leadership roles. And do you know what happened? I encountered 2 major sources of resistance. One was from men who questioned my judgment, but only about the leadership positions I'd offered to women, not about the ones I'd offered to men. And when I pointed that out to them, they went, really? And the other one was from the women themselves, who said, are you sure? So as Jess said, it wasn't that they weren't competent, it was that they didn't believe they were competent. Because after many, many years of being passed over for opportunities you're quite capable of, you internalize it. So if you're going to ask me, which you haven't yet, but I want to talk about it, what stands in the way of gender equity? My answer is we do. We all do, men and women. And everything I've talked about, all of these problems were amplified during COVID. Gender inequalities became even worse. You know, childcare centres closed, children were kept to school. Who carried the burden of care for that? It was women. And that's had greater impact on women's opportunities for promotion and leadership and so on. And I also want to come back to, just before I finish, the comment about trickle-down feminism. One of the things I noticed was that when I was made head of school, people went, the problem is solved. We've had a woman head of school, it's all right now. It's not fixed. And unless we're constantly vigilant, unless we're constantly calling out gender bias, which is so tiresome, unless we fight against all male panels or manels, unless we ensure that women are represented as candidates for jobs, that they're considered fairly in relation to promotions. I've been on promotions committees lately, and I've had to fight about relative to opportunity judgments. If we relax for 1 minute, 1 second, we slip back to the status quo, and the status quo is white and male. And I'm so tired of fighting this, and I'm so tired of having to ask the questions and be the thorn, the sticky wheel. Everyone needs to carry responsibility for the fight, but I want to see men carry it more.
Thank you, Romola. We're going to open it up to questions in a second, okay? But I just want to pin the panel down for a second on, I think, a thread that runs across points. And I'm going to start, Jess, with you on this. I mean, you've got future women political careers, political leaders, you know, and relating to the other points made by the panelists. One of the things we're interested in is what works. What are the measures that you take, not just in your program, but the political parties, the media, Parliament, state and federal, all these institutions, all these individuals, what are the things that you think make a difference or you want more of?
Yeah.
Because I think it's quite important to talk about, you know, what it is that's going to make a difference.
Yeah, the biggest thing that we've seen, and it sounds quite basic, but when women have come through our program and have left the program, if they've been able to, first of all, they have a network of the women they've graduated with, which is the biggest, biggest proponent for them going forward in politics. But also if they're able to gain a mentor within the political sphere, what we've seen, that's someone alongside them encouraging them to take those steps further. What we've seen of women who've come through the program, they've been able to get a mentor or to get politicians taking them under their wing. That's helped them go forward in their political walk or political journey, I should say. Also as well, when we've had politicians come and do the program and met the graduates or met the participants, that again has put that we need more women in politics in the forefront of their mind, because yes, that's their lived experience being a politician, whether they identify as male or female, though they forget that when they're out there every day doing the work that they're doing. So that's really important as well. The one thing I would say that's still the barrier, and still it hasn't changed yet, is the code of conduct. So that's a massive blockage for why women won't enter politics. And even though we've seen some movement in that, it hasn't been enough. So there's still a lot of work there that needs to be done. So I can't say that we've solved it, because we haven't. That's why we have this panel here today. But there is progress being made there. But I would say, again, if you don't have anyone walking alongside you with your political journey, it gets very dark and very lonely. And you can't navigate politics if you don't have a roadmap or if you don't know who you should be connected with or anything like that. So very basic, like if you'd be working, as professors in academia, having people that can mentor you and guide you is really important.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Sukhjit, one of the things you were telling me about previously is the problem of being typecast. So on the one hand, the creative and entertainment industry has got a huge number of vacancies and demand for people of colour and women of colour, but that's kind of it, okay, which is they want people in that very narrow sort of sense. Can you talk a little bit about what that problem is and what can be done about it for the panel?
Absolutely. It's very similar. When you were speaking about the academic world, it's not a world that I'm in, but it's just so many similarities across industries. Sure, you can have as many numbers of actors and faces and dancers and, just standing there saying the lines, but that's not going to make a difference until the people at the top, the writers, the producers, the directors, people who hold the money and the greatest power in the industry, until those people have, representation of women and women of colour, people with lived experiences of all these issues that we like to say we're comfortable talking about, But I think I think people are actually quite threatened as well. I think that even with the issues you're talking about, I think that the accountability of your code of conduct is so important. And I feel like in my world, accountability of giving people the ability to tell their own stories. You know, how long does it have to take before, you know, someone can actually let me tell my own script? And also get paid for it. Like, I think, you know, also the arts. I mean, there's so many layers to what's going on in my life. Obviously, like, there's lots of arts issues going on as a global country. You were saying when you came from the UK and you looked at Australia, we have a very masculine culture, you know, and I freak out around that. Like, as a kid, I thought it was okay. I just freak out and I didn't know what it was. And now as an adult, I'm like, oh my God, that's what that is. You know, last night going out, just walking around like the city and going out for a dinner and a whatever, hang out. I just get so confronted by these flocks of guys, and it has to be this macho, like the boys, has to be this like, yeah, look at me. And I'm like, hang on, wouldn't feminism also benefit you? Like, I've seen it firsthand. We've seen documentaries from 10 years ago, like, where we talk about how feminism can help men as well in this fight that they're going through. But unfortunately, I think that people don't see the benefit. They go, oh, well, what's in it for me? I might lose something. We see this between race and gender. It's this fear of losing something, losing power, losing money, losing agency. But once again, you know, progress can't be made until everyone's kind of got a bit of that. And I think there's plenty to go around. Do you think there's enough to go around? We live in such a bloody amazing country that's so, like, I don't know, prosperous and rich and fair go, but I don't know if that's really happening. I think it's just a narrative that we like to tell ourselves so we don't feel bad at night.
Yeah.
Didn't even answer the question. I don't know what the question was.
That's okay. I've forgotten as well.
Yeah.
So Linda, I want to finish where we started.
It's good.
In '94, this report was published. I think you've got a copy, you're going to wave it around.
Yeah, I've got a copy.
Earlier this week, Linda published an opinion piece in the West talking a bit about that and so on. But the question I want to go back to is that it clearly had all these recommendations, which you'll be familiar with. And looking back, do you have a sense of, not so much did that one work, did this one work, I mean, but was the approach the right one? Should we be relying upon the next task force to do the heavy lifting? What are your reflections about what can be done if we're going to put energy in this space in the future?
Well, I probably think we've got enough reports and recommendations and aspirational statements. I don't think that's our problem. I think as I said earlier, I don't think that gender bias is understood and accepted the way it needs to be. We're talking about, with gender bias, attitudes that go back centuries. I mean, I was just reminded of this. I was watching a program 2 or 3 weeks ago about the Tudors, and I was looking at Henry VIII. Now, when we were taught about Henry VIII, it was, you know, I always remember divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived. This was a man who murdered wives that he didn't want. We were taught as if somehow they were beheaded and, you know, a bit iffy why, but, you know, that's the way it was. He was probably the greatest perpetrator of domestic violence in history. He set up a church, the Church of England, simply to get rid of a wife. Women were completely and utterly the possessions of men. That is where we have come from. And there has been change, but we're talking about a timeline where the change we're talking about is fairly recent. So that's why I would say, if I had something to say for a federal government, and we did have this did discuss this in terms of public policy, that I would want the federal government to make it absolutely clear in all that they do that gender bias exists, and it must be actively addressed by running the gender bias lens across all policy, all programs. I don't mean what we've got at the moment, like a woman's report on certain portfolios. That's the approach we've had so far, as well as a very reactive approach. So, for example, it was only the issues within the Defence Department were only looked at when the evidence was just impossible to keep under lid anymore about what was happening there. Similarly with the culture in Parliament House. Only when Brittany Higgins, when it was impossible to keep a lid anymore on what was happening, even though it was well known what was going on. And we've tended to be like that. We wait, we turn a blind eye until we've got no choice, and we have then we have a Royal Commission. And I'd really add to what the two young women on the panel have said and why I raised the issue about being patient. And the words that Greta Thunberg said at the Edinburgh conference really, really resonated with me when she said, blah, blah, blah. That's what she said. And when Grace Tame wouldn't smile. She was perfectly polite, but she wouldn't smile. So I think that we really need this new wave of activism by young women. My generation, I think we were more traditionally educated. I was a lawyer that if you work hard, if you make the case, make the case and then you'll get ahead with that. We have realised that making the case and playing by the rules, and political parties particularly have got rules which are very much men's rules, and informal networks, which is all to do with having a drink after work and who you know and we'll get back to you and work hard and you might have a chance, that a younger group of women really, really need to push back against that. Otherwise, I expect in 30 years, when I will not be here, that there will be the same discussions being had.
Thank you, Linda. Look, we've got these mics in the room. I'm looking for them. There's one there and there's one over there. If you'd like to ask a question, just put your hand up. I can see a lady right here. I can see your hand. I can't see you very well. And I can see another one there on the left. Can you see? Hi. You got the microphone to that woman over there? Okay. Well, I was going to ask that woman first. Can you see there? Can we go with her first? She caught my eye first. Please go ahead. And if it's to someone in particular.
Good afternoon, it's to the panel. My background is I work in recruitment in finance. I have a specialist area. My most common responsibility is helping women apply for positions where they have doubt that they don't meet all the criteria. You referenced that earlier and helping that. So my responsibility is also about the decision makers also coming to that understanding, and positively they do. We've got a movement there. But could you perhaps contribute about how you think we can shift that psyche for our women to build the confidence to apply when they have less of the criteria but they can fill the positions?
I'm going to get Jess to comment on that in terms of people applying to be a candidate. Think about that.
Yeah, I think that's just undoing years and years of doubt and self-belief that's driven to you in the society that you live in. I think, it's almost a shock, what Romela experienced when she put women in positions of leadership in the School of Psychology at UWA, that people have said, "Are you sure?" I've said, "Are you sure?" so many times. But you honestly need a huge, cultural shift for that to happen, where it becomes normal, where women are like, you know what, I don't have all these skills for this job ad or whatever they want to apply for, but I'm just going to go for it. That is a huge cultural shift that I don't know, I hope we see in our generation, but maybe it'll be in the next generation where that's just normal, where people feel like they can just do shit and not have the qualifications. That would be amazing. Though I would just say, having people like yourself in organisations that actually believe in people and are consistently promoting them and encouraging them is really important, because one of the things that I think all the panellists share, and also with Martina and I, is that we have to be those people that are constantly pushing people when they lack self-belief, where there is self-doubt, because that's just a chain that they've had over their life, what they've been spoken into, the society that we're all being brought up in, or all live in. But we need to be, I guess, for a better word, like that change maker, actually, no, you've got this. But it's not going to be easy. And I don't have the big solution for that, but except be that person in your own community. Yeah.
So the question that was there, I can't, is that, and if it's to someone in particular, please say so.
I'm not sure. Is it working? Cool. It's not for anyone in particular, anyone on the panel that would want to jump in. My name is Sunmi. I am a mental health worker. I used to be a youth pastor a while ago. I'm also a writer, performer. I work in theater. I'm a producer. I've been here in Australia for 12 years now. And I guess one thing that I have noticed when it comes to any kind of Western culture that has basis in Judeo-Christian belief systems, it's embedded, the patriarchal narratives are embedded in biblical narrative, and biblical literacy is not something that's encouraged in this country, in my experience. And so much of it is even just in the book of Genesis and the curse of Eve, and the sense of entitlement that men have to women and women's bodies comes from this curse of Eve, and God saying that you will rule over this woman because the fall of man. But if we look at how religious beliefs, especially in Western culture, how that is driven with countries like America, where half of the country is evangelical Christian, therefore they're literalist. They believe exactly that this is to the word, and therefore it cannot be argued against. And so people in power that have this mentality, there's no way that they will be able to not just relate, they won't see it as relevant, or they'll see it as sinful. And there's a sense of collective responsibility in those kind of religious environments. And up until recently, we had a prime minister that was evangelical Christian as well. And so, and another thing is schools in this country being mostly religious are the ones, or the private schools being mostly religious, the ones that people tend to aim for, as if that's where you'll get a better education. And that's where you have the pockets of power as well. They come from the environment that's privileged, it's private education, it's religious education, and it's just a self-perpetuating environment. And so I guess my question would be, what would be your ideas around how we can shift this? How can we change this? How can we even get people to talk about this being a reality, this undercurrent of just religious doctrine that is actually driving this country, even though we think of it as a secular society? Thank you.
Thank you. Who would like to comment on that?
I'm happy to say something, and obviously it accords with me, as I gave the example of Henry VIII and the attitudes and a religion actually being established based on him wanting to divorce Catherine of Aragon. I think in Australia we do have a far greater separation. We are a secular country in a way, and I have lived in America. America is not, but I do think that it is very worrying what we are seeing in America at this time, and I'm sure many of you have got keeping a sharp eye about how rights that women have fought for can actually quite quickly begin to be undermined, and that's what's happening in America. And it appears that there is some reversion or some trend now to this much more conservative approach to women. I mean, many of you would have seen the serial The Handmaid's Tale and read the book, but there's something quite prescient about what has been shown there. So, well, what can we do? Well, you just have to keep speaking up. And as I said, be less patient, and this is where young women are really showing the lead. They are not being prepared, or the ones we've been talking about, they've not been prepared to be fobbed off in the same way. And I think older women, we should be supporting them in that. And I hate it when baby boomers in particular are so critical of younger generations. I mean, I know it's sort of a common thing for older generations to say that about young generations, but the younger generations that I see in my children, adult children, their 20s and 30s, and their friends, and what I see, they are, I think, really what the federal government, if it really wants to do something, should be listening to. That would be my view on it.
Thank you. Let's take as many as we can now. Let's get the questions briefly and the answers briefly. Woman over here, And then there's a hand over there. I can't see who it is, but I think this woman is first, actually. She was waiting. Go ahead.
Thank you. It's a slightly complex question that I don't think can be answered in 5 minutes, but we'll give it a go. So the conversations around gender are evolving at a rate of knots at the moment. So if you look at the conversation, full disclosure, I'm the mother of a non-binary child. So if you look at the conversations that are happening from the trans community, people who identify as non-binary, do you see those conversations around gender as a threat or an opportunity when you're talking about gender parity, gender equity?
Thank you. Let's get 2 quick answers. Romola?
Absolutely an opportunity. I have a very inclusive view of what I mean by gender bias. So my view is that what I'm looking for is to be treated equally on the basis of what I bring to the table, regardless of how I identify and what I have between my legs or under my armpits, wherever my bits are. I really don't care, and I really wish we could be genuinely agnostic. So if you're non-binary, if you're genderqueer, if you're whatever, you should be treated with equal respect and given equal opportunity. And I really can't be doing with this sort of either you're for women or you're against women, or it's not, I'm not binary about the way I think. I think it's much broader than that. And I welcome the debate about what it means to be non-binary or to be questioning about your gender identity, because I think these debates help us articulate the biases that we're experiencing and to understand them and therefore to call them out. So I think it's a good thing.
Thank you. Anyone else? Sukhjit?
Oh, it's interesting. I'm going to answer both those questions because there's something in that. And I grew up in a Sikh family where we've got gender-neutral names. So both my parents have the exact same name, and it was kind of awkward because people would be like, "Oh, is it mum or dad?" And I'm like, "Oh, I don't know, like same name. I don't know how to explain it." And then I also grew up with a wedding ceremony that's also doesn't define what gender. And that's really controversial to say in the Sikh community because there's a lot of like internalized colonization. And I think I thought you couldn't say the word God in Australia. I went to a public school, couldn't talk about God. But it's really ironic because all the shitty things that you spoke about that are happening in Australia, isn't it ironic that like Australia hates Muslims and yet there's like all our religions are going through such similar shit in terms of human problems, humans ruin stuff, and then like the religion itself, well, Sikhism wasn't even meant to be a religion, it was just meant to be a Sikh, the ism got added later by white people, and all the translations. Now young people, young Sikhs all around the world are going, hang on, where do I fit into this? And we started off, if you look at the origins of like my traditions and my culture, it was non-binary, it was about fluidity, it was about all these terms that we now have vocab for now. And then the West gets onto it, and then those cultures are like, oh my God, what do we do? So it's almost like, how do we go back into researching? How did we live? How did we actually exist and treat each other? And I think that, I don't know what happened along the way. I'm not a historian, but I feel like, you know, patriarchy came along and was just like, nah, we're going to box everything, we're going to define everything, we're going to give you roles and responsibilities according to who you are, rather than just accepting and going, you know, and maybe your child, I hope that they're having a good time in school now. I hope that it's getting better. I hope that school kids are just like, you know, no one's going up to someone nowadays, hopefully, and going, what are you? Because it's just like, no, I am. I just am. And that's where I want to head.
Thank you. Okay, so there's a hand there. I can't actually see your face, but I can see a hand. Give that person a mic. And then after that, there's one here. These lights make it really difficult for me to pinpoint this. There you are. Cheers, mate. Sorry, it's just gonna get to you. There you go.
I wanted to challenge the statement made that we are a secular society. We have Equal Opportunity Act, and within that there's a subsection that pertains to religious exemptions. And those religious exemptions enable paternalistic practices. They influence the nature of your contract based on your gender, your sexuality. They can terminate your practice because you've fallen pregnant, and they have wider influences. I work within health, and the sexual health that you will be provided because your postcode is near Sir Charles Gardner or Fiona Stanley is very much different to what you will receive if your postcode is adjacent to Joondalup, even though those institutions are all publicly funded. So I wondered what the panel's position is on our existing religious exemption laws as it applies to gender equality. Thank you.
Okay, so briefly, who wants to?
Well, I talked about us being a secular state, and we are, in the sense that in terms of the way we have the separations of powers, and that we don't have a religious head of state anymore. But I certainly take your point about how religion impacts, and certainly you would be aware, if you work in health, about the impact of St John of God winning the contract to run the Midland Hospital, and how that's affected services that are available at that hospital. And certain services are not available at that hospital because of the religious views of the St John of God group. So I agree with you, and I think that it's something that we need to be ever vigilant about. I suppose the point I was making, and some people might talk about school pastors in the same way as an incursion by religious institutions into the public school system. But I suppose the bigger point I was making, or my hope, is that Australia, which most people, when they do census, or the majority, do not identify with a religion, at the moment, is less vulnerable than perhaps a country like America, which I think is going to be going through an extremely difficult period. And I hope a change of government at the federal level will also be helpful.
Okay, thank you. So, off you go.
Yes, so I actually conducted that original research that found that there were more men named Andrew than there were women in corporate leadership. Yes. While gender is the obvious part of that, it actually the thing that always struck me about that, and the subsequent analysis from there, was actually what it said about cultural backgrounds, about someone's age, and the socioeconomic background of those people, which kind of goes into a point that I think Ms. Savage raised early on, which was around trickle-down feminism. And, you know, while we do see more women holding those, you know, in corporate leadership and in political leadership and those sort of things progressing, it hasn't always borne a huge amount of obvious fruit. And I'm just wondering, what's the panel's view on how that is actually changed? How is there more benefits shared more broadly?
Wants to come in? You want to just clarify just a bit more? Just say a bit more, go on.
Yeah. Well, you know, when we start to see more, the expectation that with more women in leadership there would be more benefits shared for more women more broadly, and that, as was suggested before, hasn't necessarily occurred. How is that changed? How do we see more benefits shared more broadly?
Okay, so I'm going to slightly reinterpret your question. First of all, is it the case that when more women are at the top, women in general benefit? I mean, that's just worth thinking about. And you know, what's the best way to sort of get there? I mean, is this going to be about critical mass at the top of politics, top of universities, and so on? I'm just riffing off your question a bit.
Yeah. There. So I think there are a couple of answers to that. Is I think there can be benefits just to having women at the top, because you can't be what you can't see. Okay, and my own experience of being a first female head of school was humbling, because there were lots of young academics and postgraduate students and postdocs who came to me and said, I can now see myself where you are. I mean, it almost brought me to tears. So I think there's something massively symbolic about that, but symbolism isn't enough. The other thing that I think one can do if you're a female leader to help promote other women is through a kind of service leadership model of mentoring, of appraisal, of meeting people, helping them through their applications, reading their CV, helping them practice their presentations, coaching them through that kind of insecurity. And it's something that I feel very strongly about and something I've tried to do. But I'm a limited resource, right? We can't have a small number of individuals lifting all of the heavy weight. We've all got to do it together. And so that's why I'm saying I think men need to do it too, for women in particular. And they need to see that that's their responsibility and to understand the differences that women doubt themselves, that we have imposter syndrome in spades. I didn't want to be head of school. I was marched to it by colleagues and friends who said, you should do this. And I went, are you sure? It was the best thing I've ever done in my life, the best opportunity for growth, and I nearly talked myself out of it. We need allies. We absolutely need to be allies for those who come after.
Okay, thank you.
And you don't need a daughter or a mother or a girlfriend or a, relationship to you to care. Like, it doesn't need to be about the
great last word.
Okay, so time is going to slip by. I'm sorry, I'm just going to ask the panel one short question. They actually got 35 seconds each, and I'm going to measure this, okay? So anyone's seen in federal politics, things have changed a bit. There's 10 women around the cabinet table of 23, it's 43%, et cetera, et cetera. Whatever else has changed in Australia, the optics have changed in Canberra, and we can see that. So if you were minister for the day, or if you wrote a memo to the woman who's been put in charge of women's interests, which is Kate Gallagher, who's also the finance minister, what would you write in that, Romola? Just, you've got 35 seconds. Just share that with you.
Okay, so I would overturn the university job-ready graduates package. Women are overrepresented in arts humanities subjects, and yet now they're being charged double fees, which produces financial insecurity in the long term. What on earth are we doing? Stop it.
Thank you. Jess.
Stop putting women in unwinnable seats, and there must be a quota for women entering all seats. I don't know how you'd word it, but yeah.
Excellent.
Actually put women in seats that they can win, basically that, yeah.
10 seconds,
That's my policy.
Great. Okay, that's even better, okay?
Yeah.
Linda?
So what I said earlier, that for every aspect of policy and every program and every bit of legislation, it has to go through the gender bias lens and be reported against and publicly available for people to say, not women's interests, not this divvying up, that this is, something, every single portfolio, every piece of policy and program and legislation.
Thank you. And Sukhjit, you get the last word.
I'm going to say a fantasy and then more of a practical answer. So fantasy, grab every misogynist, put them on an island, put them through some awesome program. They get fed, they get like awesome treatment, but it's like, it's not torture. It's like, you go through a program. Once you're ready to go back to Earth, you go back to Earth and you're ready. Practical answer, because fantasies are fantasies. I would make it a crime to pay women not equally, so equal pay, and universal childcare.
Yeah.
Keep women in work, get them work.
Thank you. More than adequately answered that question. Look, I'm going to finish this under instructions to land this on the deck at 12:45, so a couple of minutes to go. It's been a great pleasure to host this. Can I, before I go any further, thank a few people? One is the team that I have at the Public Policy Institute. Chris is here, Rebecca's online, so we wouldn't have been here had they not put in the hard yards behind the scene. Can I also thank the organisers here at the Disrupted Festival? It's been a pleasure to work with them. These things aren't easy to pull off, not least of all in the first year that we're sort of back in a room, no longer trapped behind glass, as it were. Can I also, while I got your attention, draw your attention to the fact that you can pick up a copy of the Institute's report, most recent report in the lobby. It's beautiful, 2050, glossy, nice picture. Please have a look at that. It gives you a sample of the kind of things we're up to most recently. And last plug, and certainly no more, on the 31st of August, we have an event taking place at the university itself in the morning. It's a breakfast event, and it's to do with politics and participation. It's called If Voting Wasn't Compulsory, Would You? And so it's going to be dealing with democratic norms and how people get stuck into politics and so on and so forth, some of the stuff that Jess spends her time in. It's been a great pleasure. Now, can you join me and thank our panel, all four of them? On that note, they're all yours. If you want to interrogate them, I'm sure they'll be milling around over there. Thank you.